What's good, everybody? It's your boy Big Nate. Welcome back to Big Nate's Book Reviews, home of the best book reviews. And today we got it's kind of like a book review. Yeah, we'll call it a book review, but you'll see. We'll get there. But today we're talking about The Trumpet of Conscience by Martin Luther King Jr. Here's the homie right here. And so yeah, I got my doobie right here. You already know what it is. Finna spark that. And then today we are smoking this one, big old fat doobie for Martin Luther King Jr. So if you got your doobie at home, you already know what to do on that note. Spark the doobie, especially so because it's MLK. Okay, so basically the context for this book is that last weekend, like I said in my last video, sometimes I like to have books on hand where they're just like little standalone texts, like short stories, essays, stuff like that. But one of the books I like to read is like, for instance, speeches. And that's exactly why I picked this book up long time ago, actually, at like a book sale, like a massive public library book sale. Those are the best. $2 is how much this costs. That's what I was trying to show, $2. But anyway, I got a few books and I'm just like, I'm just gonna leaf through some of them. And I picked this one up and I read the first speech, and then like it was basically like, fuck all these other books, I'm just gonna read this. So I read that over the course of the next 2 or 3 days, which for me is kind of fast. And I don't know, I just felt really moved by this book. I wanted to talk about it. And also I realized that on that weekend, I'm like, okay, isn't Wednesday Juneteenth? So I'm like, you know what, maybe I'll do like a Juneteenth video where I'll just talk about MLK just cause fuck it, and then, why not celebrate, get in the mood. Okay, so if you're like me, and I'm ashamed to admit it, but I lay my heart bare before you all. My heart is on my sleeve. I did not know what Juneteenth was, to be honest. I'm kind of stupid with respect to a lot of history and geography. Pretty much have no knowledge. It's embarrassing. It's not like a funny thing. It's like actually just sad. So for those who don't know, Juneteenth is basically, so it's referred to kind of as the second Independence Day, because what happened is the Emancipation Proclamation, which just freed the slaves essentially, was in 1863. I'm pretty sure, if I'm remembering it right. But so that applied for most of the states, but not all the US states. And the official independence of all slaves, like the very last, like when everybody was freed, was June 19th, 2 years later in 1865. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure I got that right though. But anyway, that day is like notably it's called Juneteenth, June 19th. So this day, 1865, 2024, that's like 60 years. It's okay. So it's almost been 60 years exactly since Juneteenth, which when you think about it and keep this perspective in mind, wait, hold on. No, 100. Hold up, 160 years. Yeah, I think I got it. Okay, I was really about, hold on, because I was really about to say, keep this in mind when we read this book, like how recent all of this stuff is. But honestly, yeah, okay, so the emancipation of slaves, when you think about it, actually, it's still not that long. 120 years, like slaves, that's like 2 generations. There's probably mofos still old, like, that's crazy. But especially in context, Martin Luther King Jr. was giving these speeches in, I believe it was 1967. It's something like that. Just take my word for it. Man, how do they not have the date, bro? Yeah, call it 1967. I don't want to, I'd have to like leaf through the pages. And which is a very interesting time in history, and was in full-fledged like the sort of civil rights movement for African Americans. And this book of speeches by Martin Luther King Jr. was basically a series that he agreed to do. It's like radio broadcasts in a Canadian radio. And this is when radio was popping, when that's like the main form of media. So I'm imagining everyone's just tuning into this. And then he gives these speeches, and it talks about a number of topics, and we'll get into it, like the Vietnam War, just obviously like civil rights, history of slavery, nonviolence, whole bunch of shit that we're gonna get into. But to me, I felt like the first essay, which is probably my favorite, but all of it is fire. Like if the first essay interests you, pick this book up. But I feel like it captured a lot of it. And Martin Luther King Jr. was a minister, which first off comes out totally and not only just like his themes and his messages, but even in the rhetoric, like you can tell bro is giving sermons. So I thought I'd just kind of go through, share some interesting passages, I think, in this speech. This is good history anyway, and it's just, he's fire. I said in my Goodreads review, so follow me if you know, or if you don't. But I said he reminds me of Cicero. He gives me Cicero vibes just because he's so good with the rhetoric. And then I thought in my head too, is Cicero invited to the cookout? Let me know in the comments, you who apply. Again, he's addressing a Canadian audience, right? And he's just talking to them, and he says, he's basically talking about how the US has like a really rich, or not even the US, black people have or like African Americans, whatever. Because that's actually the more correct term, I feel like, in this case. But they have a very special connection with Canada, not just because like, they're in North America, but because he says basically the relation of Canada to the Underground Railroad. which is like where they went and slaves could like travel in hiding to be free in Canada. So he says, our spirituals, now so widely admired around the world, were often codes. Spirituals being like slave songs, and that stuff's like really cool. I took a theory of music class, something like that. And back in the day, it was like music. It was like, or they're talking about how like in plantations when, you know, they would work and it's kind of like rhythmic moving, they would like almost like sing these songs to the tune of labor. It's like crazy.
But I wanna lie down. I ain't all that sleepy, but I wanna lie down. I wanna lie down.
Our spirituals, now so widely admired around the world, were often codes. We sang of heaven that awaited us, and the slave masters listened in innocence, not realizing that we were not speaking of the hereafter. Heaven was the word for Canada. And then he talks about how in this they talk about, there's a song called, what is it? What did you say? Follow the drinking gourd, right? And it's like this idea, the song lyrics just seem harmless enough, but like the drinking gourd is literally a disguise, he says, for the directions to escape into Canada.
Well, a river ends between two hills. Follow the drinking gourd. There's another river on the other side. Follow the drinking gourd.
So that first off, we're on the first page. We're on the first, like literally this is how he's saying what's up to the people. And then he's talking about, so a big thing about Martin Luther King is nonviolence. And he's talking about, for instance, and you can achieve real social change through nonviolence. He's speaking in a historical time where they've had a lot of success in the past few years, but they're meeting backlash. And then there's also been sort of like violent African-American riots. So we're going to get into all that, but he's saying merely to march in public streets was to rock the status quo to its roots. When you have these mass marches where people are just marching through completely peacefully, right? Even though they're being violently attacked by white people, complete peace. And I like this part right here. He says, if they let us march, they had admitted their lie that the black man was content, right? Because if they have these thousands and thousands of people protesting, it's expressing a social discontent. And if they shot us down, they told the world they were inhuman brutes, right? So it's like that. Okay, so that's how you really feel. And then he says, right, this is a fantastic passage. Nonviolence had muzzled their guns and Negro defiance had shaken their confidence. When they finally reached for clubs, dogs, and guns, they found the world was watching, and then the power of nonviolent protest became manifest. It dramatized the essential meaning of the conflict and made clear who was the evildoer and who was the undeserving victim. So like there's a lot here, even just like the sort of media portrayal of, I guess, like that's one thing, because he says the world was watching, which I think is an important part. Everybody is seeing these mass protests taking place in the South. Obviously something needs to change. But what happens is, and this is the key part of nonviolence, is because they resort to violence anyway. When they reached for the dogs and clubs and guns, everybody was watching. And like he says, it dramatized the essential meaning of the conflict, right? This wasn't about like political, actual social change. It was just straight up racism. And you can just see that because, and the message becomes all the more powerful when you're acting completely nonviolent. Like it's like it's a godly principle of, what was it? Hit my cheek, I turn the other. And this is why bro got the fucking Nobel Peace Prize. So, okay, so then he goes on to talk about other stuff. Okay, so he's talking about like, hey, we actually had some success. It was looking good. There was some white and black support. Like there were white people supporting the mission. But then like basically once they started pushing a little too much, right, they wanted complete equality. So he says most of the white majority were outraged by brutality. Their goal was improvement, not freedom nor equality. When Negroes could use public facilities, register and vote in some areas of the South, find token educational advancement, again in token form, find new areas of employment, it brought to the Negro a sense of achievement, but it brought to the whites a sense of completion. So basically it's like you're giving them giving some breadcrumbs, but then the white people are like, you know, give a mouse a cookie and they're gonna ask for all the. You get what I'm saying there. It's like the white people are seeing it as like, okay, we'll give you a little, we'll appease you, but it's like, no. You thought you were about to be like, you know, like equal, complete social equality? I don't think so. Another really interesting thing here that he talks about. So, because at this point there have been violent outbreaks, and we're going to get into all that because there's some really interesting characteristics of this violence. But he says here, 1 million words will be written and spoken to dissect the ghetto outbreaks. I would submit 2 sentences written a century ago by Victor Hugo. If the soul is left in darkness, sins will be committed. The guilty one is not he who commits the sin, but he who causes the darkness. The policymakers of the white society have caused the darkness. They created discrimination. They created slums. They perpetuate unemployment, ignorance, and poverty. It is incontestable and deplorable that Negroes have committed crimes, but they are derivative crimes. They are born of the greater crimes of the white society. So already you can see, by the way, just like Martin Luther King is absolutely fire. Like, bro is dropping straight bars. Also quoting Victor Hugo, like, that's so fire. Also, Martin Luther King Jr. said when I was reading about the Republic, that was one of the books that he said that was the book he would take to a desert island. Martin Luther King said he would take the Republic. If that doesn't get you to read both of these fools, I don't know what will. So then he goes on to say, because what at this point what the media is kind of doing is pointing out the violence of the riots, right, and how this was lawless, and it's like, this is not the way to get rights. You know, this is completely the wrong approach. But then he says, when we ask Negroes to abide by the law, let us also declare that the white man does not abide by law in the ghettos. Day in and day out, he violates welfare laws to deprive the poor of their meager allotments. He flagrantly violates building codes and regulations. His police make a mockery of law. And then he says, let us say it boldly, that if the total slum violations of law by the white man over the years were calculated and were compared with the law breaking of a few days of riots, the hardened criminal would be the white man. So it's just like, that's absolute, like, you're getting mad about these riots and you're just like completely missing the bigger picture. It's like, do you realize why they are rioting? You are the one who's creating the darkness in which this sin is born. They're rioting as a reaction to as he says, the just like massive amounts of just discrimination and racism is really just, at the end of the day, what it is. But what I like about Martin Luther King too is he has the nuance. Like, he's not just black and white, so to speak. He's like, you know, in using the term white man, I'm seeking to describe in general terms the Negro's adversary. It is not meant to encompass all white people. To develop a sense of black consciousness and peoplehood does not require that we scorn the white race as a whole. It is not the race per se that we fight, but the policies and ideology that leaders of that race have formulated to perpetuate oppression. And he talks about this all throughout the book. And if anything, and this is something I've been thinking about more, is how much of just in general is this stuff like related to race and how much of it is related to class. And of course there's going to be unique experiences to both, but all throughout this book he's also talking about basically the poor black man and the poor white man kind of in solidarity. We're getting fucked just in general by it's so crazy because he's talking about, and again, same shit Plato was on. You heard me talk about this, where he's talking like, but in the 1960s he's basically warning against billionaires, just crazy excessive distributions of wealth. And he's saying like basically the rich are getting richer off the fruits of like the ever harder working conditions, working class. Another thing too, just like, so he's talking about this, intimately related to discrimination is one of its worst consequences, unemployment. The United States teetered on the edge of revolution, blah, blah, blah. Today, in the midst of historic prosperity, unemployment for Negro youth, according to government figures, runs as high as 30 to 40% in many cities. With most of their lives yet to live, the slamming of doors in their faces can be expected to induce rage and rebellion. And then he even says up here, even when, dude, so just so many good quotes. Even when a Negro manages to grasp a foothold on the economic ladder, discrimination remains to push him off after he has ascended a few rungs. It hounds him at every level to stultify his initiative and insult his being. So for one, just like the rhetoric of unemployment, where it's like painted in some cases it's painted as, you know, like you have the lazy like welfare queen and people basically just who mooch off of these government programs, where he's thinking about like unemployment as basically a weaponized tactic. Like they're having the economic door slammed in their face constantly throughout this book. He says this is an economic war. It's not just, the two are intertwined, race and economy. So, and then on top of this, just if this shit wasn't crazy enough, we have the Vietnam War going on. And he's talking about this. He says, Negroes are conscripted in double measure for combat. They constitute more than 20% of the frontline troops in a war of unprecedented savagery, although their proportion in the population is 10%. They are marching under slogans of democracy to defend a Saigon government that scorns democracy. At home, they know there is no genuine democracy for their people, and on their return, they will be restored to a grim life as second-class citizens, even if they are bedecked with heroes' medals. So it's just the whole absurdity of that. You have black people who are already so marginalized, but then like way overrepresented in the front lines of unprecedented savagery, he says, to defend something that they don't, the rights that they don't even get to enjoy. And then it reminds me of, I'm pretty sure, right, I think it's like a Muhammad Ali talking about this clip where he's basically like, because he's draft dodging or whatever, and he's like, why would I go fight the white man's war for basically literally just this, for things that I don't even get to enjoy at home, and I don't even know these people, and if anything, we're the ones fucking them up.
My conscience won't let me go shoot my brother or some darker people or some poor hungry people in the mud for big powerful America and shoot them for what? They never called me nigger. They never lynched me. They never put no dogs on me. They never robbed me of my nationality, raped and killed my mother and father. What, I'm going to shoot them for what? How can I go shoot them? Them little poor little black people, little babies and children and women. How can I shoot them poor people? Just take me to jail.
I'm not going to help nobody get something my Negroes don't have. If I'm going to die, I'll die now, right here fighting you. You my enemy. My enemy is the white people, not Vietnams or Chinese or Japanese. You my opposer when I want freedom. You my opposer when I want justice. You my opposer when I want equality. You won't even stand up for me in America for my religious beliefs, and you want me to go somewhere and fight, but you won't even stand up for me here at home.
And then back at home, what they have to look forward to is degenerating conditions of urban life. The cities are gasping in polluted air and enduring contaminated water. Public facilities are outworn and inadequate. Financial disaster is an annual crisis. Within this chaos of neglect, Negroes are stifled at the very bottom in slums so squalid their equal is not to be found in any other industrial nation of the world. So he's just talking about these people are living in literal, this is like the origin, I'm realizing, of the word ghetto. They're basically not given employment, forced to live in just these absolute impoverished conditions which are not cared for in any way, and then so squalid their equal is not to be found in any other industrial nation of the world. And then what people need to keep in mind is what I was saying earlier. This was, I'm pretty sure this was in 1967. That at this point is like around 60 years, a little less than 60 years. I'm pretty sure I got that one right. This is what people mean when they talk about like systemic racism, structural racism. Like the idea that there wouldn't be generations long lasting consequences of this treatment, which really goes back all the way to slavery, is like the fact that you think it would just poof since 1967. There's no trace of slavery or racism anymore. It's ludicrous. And then another thing that he points out, which is just interesting, almost like sociologically, he noticed like about these riots, which took place as a cause of all these things that we've been talking about. He noticed that basically it had to do, he says, the bruising edge of the weapon of violence was employed almost exclusively against property, not persons. And then picking up from another essay, he says, almost like it almost reads into it, why were they so violent with property then? Because property represents the white power structure which they were attacking and trying to destroy. So it's like even in these riots, they're not even after like actual people. It's not really against violence against persons and beings. It's really violence against this symbolic, what he says, what represents the white power structure. Furthermore, he says, a curious proof of the symbolic aspect of the looting was that after the riots, police received hundreds of calls from Negroes trying to return merchandise they had taken. Those people wanted the experience of taking, of redressing the power imbalance that property represents. Possession afterwards was secondary. Like really, it was the participation in this symbolic, as he says, redressing of the power imbalance. The whole riot, even though it was quote unquote violent, still, if anything, was more symbolic than anything. Okay, so one of his big themes too that he's talked about throughout this whole book, because again, all of this stuff, even the Vietnam War aspect of it, all of this gets talked about throughout the book. This is a good representative essay. But one of the big themes is just mass civil disobedience. Non-violence does not mean passivity in the face of these injustices. It's a very active like philosophy, but just through non-violence. But yes, he says nonviolent protests must now mature to a no level to correspond to heightened black impatience and stiffened white resistance. This higher level is mass civil disobedience. There must be more than a statement to the larger society. There must be a force that interrupts its functioning at some key point. He's blatantly trying to, because he has another point in this essay, which I love. It's all about action, political action, and advocate, which is to people like actually doing protests, like really out there, boots on the ground. This is props to you, because he talks about like, yeah, so we wrote to Congress years ago talking about we have exactly like, here's kind of our problems, here's actual solutions to it. We would like to implement this as like an economic social policy. Sits there, they don't do a thing, and then he talks about, but all of a sudden once we marched on whatever the Capitol, then all of a sudden now they're listening and change is actually happening. So he's still like, literally, there must be more than a statement to the larger society. There must be a force that interrupts its functioning at some key point. I'm reminded of the what are they? I don't even know exactly all about this, but I know that like garbage truck collectors in New York striked, and like after 2 or 3 days they literally had to declare a state of emergency. It's like that's one of those mass civil disobedience. It's not hurting anybody, but boy is it sending a message. And then I love this too. It's like he's really I think Martin Luther King Jr. is a psychologist too. I'm gonna say that throughout this book he's speaking like symbolically, spiritually. Like that's what I mean where that preacher come out of him. But he says mass civil disobedience as a new stage of struggle can transmute the deep rage of the ghetto into a constructive and creative force. Like that's I feel like that's just such a powerful line. The transmutation, it's like really that Freudian Jungian, like converting energy in one domain into more creative and productive energies. And then this last part too, again, the rhetoric. And again, for what comes to mind for me, Cicero, I don't know why, but I mean, I do know why, but it's just very different topics, but similar rhetorical styles. The developed industrial nations of the world cannot remain secure islands of prosperity in a seething sea of poverty. Isn't that fire? The developed industrial nations cannot remain secure islands of prosperity in a seething sea of poverty. He's talking about industrial nations as islands, but you can also think of like the extremely wealthy, like for instance, just the United States, we have a select few that are like extraordinarily wealthy, whereas the struggling working class just far outnumbers and could be completely satiated with just a small portion of that. The storm is rising against the privileged minority of the earth and will not abate until a just distribution of the fruits of the earth enables man everywhere to live in dignity and human decency. And then he says, in closing, last sentence here, the American Negro of 1967, like Crispus Attucks, who, by the way, was the first person who died in the American Revolutionary War, and he was black. So the first person who died for the American Revolution and for American independence was literally a black person, Crispus Attucks, may be the vanguard in a prolonged struggle that may change the shape of the world as billions of deprived shake and transform the earth in their quest for life, freedom, and justice. And if that's not fire, then I don't know what the fuck is. So 5 stars to MLK Jr. Shout out to bro. And honestly, I know this is just 5 of his speeches. It's not even I Have a Dream. So I need to check that out. I also need to do the same for Malcolm X. If he has a book of speeches, let me know. I know he has his autobiography, but the speech format is, I think, really interesting, and I would like to see like Malcolm X doing, or just anybody, but you know, the other side of that spectrum. So let me know what you think about Martin Luther King Jr. Any other speeches, or just anybody I should check out. And thank you for listening. Thank you for watching Big Nate's Book Reviews, home of the best book reviews.